everybody. It's really windy right now, and I'm just trying to get this shot of this river leading into the mountains here in Patagonia. But Patagonia is kicking my ass. I mean, I can barely hold my camera and myself up. My apologies in advance if the production value of this lesson seems a little lower than usual. Patrick's bag flew away. He had to go chase it. Lee is holding the camera handheld because Patrick has the tripod. And he went after his bag, which flew. I don't even know where it went. So we're here doing the best we can. It's a pretty straightforward composition. This river leads right into the mountains. And I'm trying some different compositions because there's no way I can blend. If I let go of my camera right now, it's going to fly away. But I'm basically trying to get the river to come through the right side of the frame and lead into the area of Fitzroy, which a little bit earlier was out of the cloud. It looked great, but it's really challenging. So I'm not even using a 2-second timer. I'm just holding my camera down, pressing the button, and shooting 5 exposure brackets at f8. There is no focus stacking. Usually I don't stand sideways like this. Usually I'm pretty straight. Cameraman down! Cameraman down! And he fell on the spiky bush. I'm using the GFX 50S. I have the medium lens, shooting somewhere between like 35 and 45 millimeter here. I was shooting wider, but the sky is kind of closing up around the mountains. And again, I'm just trying different compositions, both vertically and in landscape mode. I am shooting in aperture priority mode, and I am stuck on the fact that I will be shooting f8 and ramming this camera into the ground so it's rock solid. I don't want to go with a high ISO. I want to say that this is shooting wide enough and my subject is so far away that it's going to be tack sharp. But obviously, whoa, we won't know that until we blow back into the post-processing studio. Take a look at this reference frame. I think I like the vertical composition the best because the lower right side, the river snakes through the frame, and then we don't have a wide landscape, so we kind of compress the mountain a little bit more. Take a look at this shot. This is in landscape mode. I really like this. I think the mountains look pretty cool. You see more of the river. You see the entire mountain chain. But my personal preference, at least right now in the field, is the vertical composition. All right, so the sun is all the way down now. So it's time to pack it up. You win this round, Patagonia. On our way out of town this morning, our final morning in Patagonia, and Fitzroy is the clearest it's been this entire time we've been visiting this area. So we decided to come back to the location where the river leads directly into the mountain. And this time, as you can see, it's actually a little breezy, but it's not like it's a hurricane-force wind out here. The thing is, I'm not gonna lie, I am freezing right now. It is like -4 degrees Celsius with this wind chill, so I'm as bundled up as I can possibly be. While this weather is cold, it looks amazing. This is the most beautiful we've seen this mountain range the entire time we've been here. Every single spire and every single angle and curve of the peak is fully visible. I arrived here 30 minutes before sunrise to get set up, and since I already had previous experience with this location, I already kind of knew what I wanted. This time, I decided to leave the camera in one place so I could potentially blend time. The other thing about today is I can see the entire span of the mountain range, so I decided to shoot a little bit wider so I can get the entirety all the way from the left to the right of the entire range of the peaks. Composition is pretty straightforward, just like one of the compositions I shot last time. I decided to include some of the sky just in case we got nice light light as well. You guys also may notice that there's a second camera. Well, this is something that I like to do sometimes too. If I have one camera set in interval timer mode, I'd like to have a second camera shooting different compositions. So this camera, I've actually just been moving at various degrees of zoom in on the mountains. So I did kind of a wider, a medium one, and close in on Fitzroy itself. I was already kind of happy with the really windy shot, and I thought it was really funny to be out here in those gale force winds already. But this is something spectacular. This mountain range is truly beautiful. It deserves all the attention it gets. But now we have an issue. I have a lot of different frames to go through, so we're going to have to take this all into post, put everything side by side, and see what works best. Hello everybody, welcome to the post-processing portion for the lesson Windy Canyon. And I think based on what you just saw, it's safe to say that it was really windy. In fact, let's go ahead and go into Lightroom, I'll show you the difference. So this is basically what I shot. I'll just pull the exposure up a little bit so we can see it. This is what I shot during the really windy portion. So you can see the clouds, pretty cool, backlit once again, but it was so windy you can actually see that rippling over this river. And of course, most importantly though, no mountains, again. So when I came back, and let's just go ahead and reset that. When I came back in the morning, it was beautiful. So obviously this needs to be adjusted. It's a little dark in the foreground, but look at the light just on the tips of the mountains there. This is a twilight shot, and then a little bit later into the morning, fully revealed mountains, slightly overcast, but complete night and day difference from this to this. So these are the files we're actually going to work with. In this lesson, we are going to combine a twilight scene with a daylight foreground, but we're still going to make it feel like it's a really nice twilight. Main reason that I want to do that is you can see in the twilight version, missing a little bit of the mountains, which is a big theme here in Patagonia, and then you can see in this one, reveal all the mountains, but I want to keep this nice twilight tonality. While I was in the field, you might remember me saying that I was shooting telephoto. I was doing that with the D850. These are great for desktop backgrounds, and we can zoom in and see some of the details of the mountain. So I'm going to include these with this lesson. These are going to be in JPEG format. And I encourage you guys to just go and slide some things around here, make them look nice, and see if you can come up with something that looks good. I also have this one here where we see these other three pinnacles. So completely different look to the wide angle scene. You can see the entire mountain chain, but these are kind of fun too. So again, use them if you want. If not, we'll just skip right ahead to the lesson itself. Let's begin by editing the twilight or the blue hour shot. And again, I'm just going to tweak that sharpening, turn that sharpening off. Let's warm it up just a little bit. Something around 8400 should do. Turn it to Adobe Landscape so it's a little bit more contrasty. We're going to need a little bit of exposure here. So let's just say half a stop. Let's roll back the highlights, half a stop. Let's go ahead and bring the shadows up a quarter, 25, and also the blacks, just like that. I really want this to feel like it's a blue hour, just light on the top of the mountains kind of look. Next, let's take a look at the daytime scene. Warm this up, let's say 9,000, so we can give warmth here. We're also going to use Adobe Landscape. Let's just go ahead and round that number off to 15. And one last thing, let's pull the highlights back a little bit just to preserve those highlights in the mountains. We're going to take both of these, 1 and 2, export with previous to get these in Photoshop. Perfect. Let's go ahead and select all, copy, close, and paste. I'm going to name this Daylight, and we'll call this Blue Hour. Perfect. Before we move on though, I'm going to go back to Lightroom. I'm going to take this original one. I should have done this first, but I'm going to go ahead and reset it. Export with previous. Use unique names. Select all, copy, close, and paste here. So I should have Daylight, Blue Hour, and our original raw. Perfect. First things first, let's go ahead and take the daylight layer. You can see as I toggle it on and off, slightly different zoom and perspective. So I'll shift click, select both, go up to Edit, Auto Align Layers. Click OK with default settings. All right, so now we have the daylight right on top. So that should line up perfectly, and it actually does. I think I just zoomed in a little bit, changed the composition. Most importantly though, those mountains should line up perfectly. Let's just zoom in and focus right in on that. So the blue hour to the daylight. You can see the difference here. We actually have some natural lighting on the tips of the spires. During the daylight, kind of softbox everything out, and we don't have that natural lighting just on the tips of the mountains. So what we're actually going to do, let's focus on replacing these mountains. So we're going to need a small area, something right around here should complete all the mountains that we need to adjust. In fact, we don't even need that much. Let's select this much, and with the daylight layer, let me use the hotkey Command J to put this on a brand new layer. Let's turn off the daylight layer, zoom in a little bit more. What I'm going to need to do is select the mountain. So I can either do the lasso technique that we've used, or I'm going to try to use the magic wand. So the magic wand, point style, 10 to tolerance, default is 32. Let's see if we can select just the blue. And that looks actually pretty good. Let's shift select these other little areas, these other pixels around it, and invert this. Command Shift I for invert. So we're going to invert that selection. And here, this is very important. I'm going to go under Select, Modify, Contract. And I'm going to contract this by 1 pixel. And that's just going to pull these edges in. In fact, let me undo that so we can see it. If I undo, you can see there's the edge. If I go up to Select, Modify, Contract, just 1 pixel. So since this selected the outside of this, I can move in by 1 pixel, just like this, and we can go ahead and create a new mask for this. And it should cut that out. Now obviously, it's a sharp edge, so what I'm going to do is go up here and feather it by 1 pixel. Just like that. That's going to soften those edges. So we go from here to here. So far, so good. If I zoom out a little bit, 1, we have the color. So we're going to need a few things here. We're going to need to mask out softly the areas that we don't need. And 2, let's add a curves layer. And we'll call this red gamma. And we'll go ahead and name this while we're at it. Mountains. All right, so red gamma, we're going to link that to the mountain layer. Go to the options. And in the red channel, a simple gamma boost. In the red, and maybe just a tiny little bit in the blue. Just a little bit. If I turn that on and off, pretty close. We can get that closer as soon as we start to mask it out. So next thing, go ahead and select this mask, and with the brush tool, make that a little bit smaller. Switch it to black. Use a flow of about 20%, and let's just start painting out the areas that we don't need. We don't need any of this down on the bottom. And to be honest, we don't need any of this either. We're really only concerned about the center part of these mountains. And if I hit the backslash key, you can see what I'm painting out. And this is a good indication here because we don't actually need any of this. Really soften that out. Soften this out. And I think I got all of that. Yep. Let's go ahead and disable the mask. I'll turn it off and on. Go ahead and add a little bit more here on this side. Perfect. So at this point, we can decide if we want this to be inside of the mountain, revealing itself from the mountain, or just fully opaque. So in this case, fully opaque. Now we can also double check this color correction. Is it too much? Let's go ahead and get rid of that blue adjustment. Let's go ahead and bring the red down just a little bit. So I think just about 60% of what I did before. Looks pretty good. I'm looking at are these tones here, and when I turn it off and on, it's a little bit brighter. So in RGB here, we can also go down a little bit, just like that, until visually, that actually looks pretty good. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. Next step, we'll hide this. Let's go ahead and take that daylight layer. Let's turn that back on, and let's look at the difference. I'm going to look at the difference by turning these off. All right, so we are missing some things here. That's no problem. Let's just go ahead and push these pixels down a little bit. I'm going to use the marquee selection, draw a square, Command J to create a new layer, Command T to transform, and I'm just going to scale this down until it meets the bottom of the frame. and hit return. And I missed a little bit. Let's do a little bit more. We'll overdo it just a hair. Hit return again. Command E to merge this back down. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to zoom out, select this part of the image, Command J for a new layer, Command T for transform, and I'm just going to scale this out, stretch it, stretch these pixels. Perfect. Command E, merge down, same thing here, we won't have to go as far. Command J, new layer, Command T, transform, and let's just go ahead and scale that out as much as we need, and we'll go ahead and merge down. So the next thing here, what I can do is turn all this back on. And what I want to use is literally the daylight foreground and the blue hour background. So I'm going to just put a mask on here with the paintbrush, 100% flow, black selected. I'm actually just going to manually paint this out. Just like that. Really quickly, just bring in the mountains and bring in the sky. If I hit the backslash key, turn this down just a little bit, let's bring all that back in. Pretty straightforward. Obviously, we could do this with a gradient and then fill in the difference, but for me, this is about the same since I'd want to kind of paint in the difference anyway. Let's hide that, and let's see. It actually looks pretty good. We'll zoom in here a little bit. And actually that little shadow doesn't bother me too much where I transformed it, but you know what? Let's go ahead and brush it out anyway. Let's just brush that out here so we have that new line with our new mountain geometry there. Same thing here, we'll just go ahead and clean that up so we end up with that new landscape edge. Other than that, off and on, not a problem at all. Next, it's not going to be much, but there could be a few things. So we say OBJ for object, removal, and let's zoom in. I remember seeing something over here, this red light on the mountain. I'm really not sure what that is. Maybe it's a brave hiker. Either way, he's gone. Really easy to take care of. And since this was the blue hour, we can kind of see that there are a few little stars. Whether these are stars or hot pixels, I'm not really sure, but let's just go ahead and see if we can find a few of them together. When you are rebuilding this, it's pretty easy to go in and find them all. And for the final one, you definitely want to go find them all, but I have a feeling there's going to be a few dozen hidden in here somewhere. So I actually have to go through, scan this entire part of the sky here above this landscape to figure out how many of these little stars there are. We just go across, up, there we go. Those are definitely stars because this was a 15 or 17 second exposure up here, so you can see that the stars were actually moving. Those were definitely the worst ones. There's another one here hidden behind the cloud. Any more hiding back there? Yeah, they're just going to be sporadically throughout this image. A few of them might actually be hot pixels too, but either way we have to go in and remove them. Something else that I noticed too on my mask, I don't know if you guys can see that, but if you zoom in here, that line, this was something that I actually totally forgot. It's good that I actually found it. The reason is, if I take a look at this mask, I actually shrunk my selection by 1 pixel and thereby left an edge. So you know what? Even I make mistakes sometimes. We all do. So you can see the edge of this mask right here. What I'm actually going to do is just go in with the brush, just like this, and I'm going to paint black, make it a little bit smaller, just like this, and really quickly paint this out. So obviously it's good that we zoomed in and found this little error. And if I take a look at it one more time, I missed it. Very hard to see that. It's like a half a pixel, like an anti-aliasing edge that's left. So if we take a look, let me soften that whole thing out there, and perfect for good measure. I think we're good. Let's go ahead and zoom that back out. Next thing, let's do some color corrections. Shift Option Command E, create a new layer of all. I'm going to name this ACRF for Adobe Camera Raw Filter. We're going to go up together into Camera Raw Filter. Now, the next step is to unify everything together, but probably most importantly for this image, and we haven't really done a twilight shot. Except for the stars, we haven't really done a twilight-looking shot. So it's important to color correct this. It's definitely too dark. I need to bring the brightness up. Overall, I want it to look like it's shot at the blue hour, so I'm not going to push things too far. So let's start with the global corrections. I'm just going to bring it up a little bit. So let's just say 1/4 of a stop overall. Now, here's something that I don't use often, and that's clarity. For those of you guys who've followed along with any of my tutorials, you know that I don't use clarity very often. But if I do start to use it, it's adding some tonal contrast. So if I go too far, you can see that's pretty bad. But just a little bit, we start to see these values separate from these values and these values. So if I just add maybe 10%, it's not going to be that destructive to the image, but it's going to start to give me some tonal contrast to make it feel a little bit more contrasty like a night shot. Next thing I want to do is adjust the color and tonality of the mountains, the sky, and the horizon so I can feel like they're further separated or lit from the landscape itself. So let's go ahead and draw one that's going to include the mountains and the horizon right about there, and let's go ahead and reset this. Let's go ahead and warm it up just a little bit. Let's go ahead and add a little bit of magenta as well. Let's pull the highlights down just a hair. Let's also pull the whites down just a hair. And let's add some dehaze. Let's see what 25 looks like. Now that's super contrasting. Let me just go ahead and adjust this gradient just a little bit. And let's go ahead and pull the shadows up just a little bit. Just pull those up maybe 50. So we'll try to stop that right on 50%. Next step, select the foreground. Let's color balance this independently. From about here to here, I'm going to go ahead and reset. Let's warm it up. Let's actually shift this in the other direction. And what I'm going to do, most importantly, is pull the highlights up. If I start pulling the highlights up, we're actually going to get the highlights in the foreground. You can see that down here. So I want to bring that up to 50 to start bringing that back. Let's go ahead and adjust this so it happens sooner and it falls off below the mountains themselves. So just the landscape, just the mountains. Go back, double check our settings. Looks pretty good. Let's do some additional editing after this. So we'll apply it. Now let's double check. Yeah, it's on the right track. Now I have to say it's really nice to have a more straightforward image that doesn't need a lot of processing or a lot of tweaking. It's unlike the waterfall lesson where we had to paint in the fall colors. Everything's right here, so it just needs a few more things. And since I'm trying to keep it dark, I actually like all the contrast in the foreground. But let's go ahead and create a few masks just to pull some more attention to the mountain and bring up the highlights in the foreground. Because I feel like the highlights, to be honest, down here are still a little bit weak. They need to be a little bit brighter. Let's go ahead and check here. We have a couple actions we can use. Let's go to channels. Let's do the create luminosity masks. Then let's do the apply luminosity masks. If I go back to layers, I should have 3 folders, one for midtones, one for shadows, and one for highlights. Go ahead and close this down. Let's start with the midtones, and let's do a curves layer. Let's go ahead and put that inside of the midtones folder here. We'll just go ahead and expand it. I'm going to call this Gamma Mountains, because there's more than one. And let's go ahead and boost this gamma. Now I did it inside the midtones so that we tried to preserve some of the highlights. And what I actually want to do is do a reflective gradient. And that's going to be this one right here. So we'll go ahead and do that. And as I draw, this will be the center point for the reflective area, and it's just going to mirror it from top to bottom. Problem is I did it the wrong way. So it was black to white. So what I'm actually going to do is swap the palette with X. We'll go back to this so we can see it, and let's try that again. Let's go from here to here. Now that's going to put the attention just on the mountains, as if the mountains are being lit. Let's change it a little bit more. Let's tighten it down so it's just the top of the mountain, like we're getting light just on the mountains. And I'm going to go ahead and adjust this, maybe give it a tiny, tiny bit of magenta, so it's going to hit that cloud and sort of hit that magenta hue that I'm looking for. Next thing that I want to do is go into the highlights, use another curves, and we're going to call this highlights FG for foreground. And let's go ahead and clamp this one quite a bit. And what I'm really looking for is these highlights and some of the shrubbery on the left and the right. This time, simple gradient, and we'll go here to here. And we have the highlights picking up in the foreground. And after we do that, we can actually see that, I selected it just right. You see the edge there of the pixels. If I start going past it, I'm going to blow out those values, which is definitely not what I want to do. I can, however, bring them up just a little bit, like this, and change this just a little bit as well. Perfect. Now I'm not going to need the shadow, so let's go ahead and delete that. Now at this point, I feel like this image is complete. It's actually nice after all those complex blending lessons to have something really easy to put together. There's just one thing that I feel like I should have done from the beginning, and that's address this weird little cloud here. So unfortunately, I don't want to go all the way back to my object removal, but if I just go to the camera raw filter layer, I can probably easily just get rid of this little smoky bit here. Yeah, no problem. And it was really minor, but it was kind of bothering me. It just drew my eye right to there. It just didn't fit with the rest of the clouds. So that aside, let's go ahead and take a look at everything that we did straight out of camera. We had the original raw, super dark now by comparison. We adjusted it so it looked a little bit more like a natural blue hour with some natural light in the foreground. Added the daylight here. After that, we added in the mountains themselves. Then we color corrected the mountains so they matched. Did some object removal, camera raw filter, and then some balancing using some curves and luminosity masks. So from the beginning, we started with this image and we built it into this. And that wraps things up here. That was a crazy, turbulent, and windy shooting situation. I'm so happy we had time on our last morning to stop here again and experience it the way that I envisioned it, being able to see the mountains and not actually getting blown over in the process. Thanks for watching. See you guys in the field.